Okay, so today we're going to be getting into some pretty heavy stuff.
Yeah.
We're talking about executive order ensuring accountability for all agencies.
Big one.
President Trump just dropped this on February 18th, 2025.
Yeah.
And
It's a doozy.
yeah, this isn't just, some minor policy tweak. This is a potential fundamental change.
Absolutely. This order is really sending shockwaves through Washington.
To how the U.S. government works.
Yeah, because it really kind of fundamentally reshapes the relationship between the White House and independent federal agencies.
And I think it's important to sort of lay that groundwork.
Yeah.
When we say independent agencies, we're talking about the heavy hitters, the Federal Trade Commission, the SEC, the Federal Election Commission.
Yep, all of them.
The ones that were, designed to operate without direct political pressure from the White House.
Independently, yeah.
So this is
a big week.
Because this order really throws a wrench into all that.
It really does. I mean, we've got, official documents, we've got legal analyses, we've got opinions coming in from all across the spectrum, experts, politicians, you name it, and we're going to try to unpack all of it for you.
Yeah, we're going to break down the key parts, what it means for financial markets, what it means for,
democracy.
Our democracy, for our system of government.
Yeah, how this could potentially change things.
And we're going to look at the legal battles that are already brewing.
Oh, yeah, it's going to get messy.
Around this.
Yeah.
So by the end of this deep dive, you'll understand why this executive order is such a big deal.
That's right.
Okay, so let's start with the sort of wow factor here.
Yeah.
This isn't just about making sure agencies are spending their money wisely.
Right.
Or, dotting their I's and crossing their T's.
It's much bigger than that.
It's about giving the White House a whole new level of control. Over these
control and power
agencies that, again, were designed to function independently.
And it's important to remember that these agencies, they were intentionally designed to be somewhat insulated from those political whims of the White House. They're supposed to be relying on expert judgment.
Yeah, so what does this actually look like in practice?
Okay.
Can you give us a concrete example?
Yeah, let's take the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission.
Okay.
All right, so let's say they're working on a new rule about climate risk disclosure for publicly traded companies.
Okay.
Under this executive order, that draft rule has to go through the White House's Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, that's OIRA, for review before it can even be officially proposed.
Wow.
So you can imagine the potential for delays, for watering down of regulations if they don't align with the White House's agenda.
Yeah, so there's this extra layer of bureaucracy, but with a very specific political agenda potentially in the mix.
Potentially in the mix.
Is there any historical precedent for this level of White House
It's a good question.
intervention?
It's certainly a significant departure from how things have traditionally worked.
Okay.
It tries to dance around certain legal precedents like Humphrey's Executor.
Oh, yeah.
That landmark Supreme Court case from 1935 that really established this basis for agency independence. Back then, you have to remember, it was the Great Depression.
Right.
There was this growing consensus that, some of these crucial decisions impacting the economy, impacting people's lives, they shouldn't be subject to these partisan swings every couple years or just, political pressure in general. And so Humphrey's Executor basically affirmed Congress's power to create these agencies with some degree of autonomy, some breathing room, to protect them from being unduly influenced.
By the president.
By the president, exactly.
So it sounds like we're potentially in uncharted territory.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely pushing the boundaries of what's been done before.
But let's keep going with the order itself.
Okay.
I mean, we were talking about OIRA review.
Right.
But it doesn't stop there.
Oh, no.
Right.
There's more.
It goes way beyond that.
Oh, yeah. This order also gives the Office of Management and Budget, the OMB, the ability to actually adjust how independent agencies spend their money.
Wow.
So we're not just talking about broad budget cuts, across the board. This is about potentially targeting specific programs or investigations that the White House might disapprove of.
So hypothetically, if the FTC was investigating a powerful corporation, let's say for antitrust violations, the White House could essentially starve that investigation of funds.
Right, essentially defund it.
Wow.
Yeah, and it doesn't stop there.
Okay.
Just to drive the point home, this order mandates that each independent agency now has to have a White House liaison.
Okay, so what is a White House liaison, and what does that mean in the day-to-day for an agency?
Essentially, it's a political appointee. So someone who answers directly to the White House, embedded within each agency. Officially, their job is to ensure smooth communication and coordination between the agency and the president.
Okay.
But, a lot of critics see these liaisons as a way for the White House to keep tabs on what agencies are doing.
Right.
And to exert more direct control over their activities.
Yeah, it's like a little mini president.
Yeah, like a little watchdog.
In each agency.
Right, making sure everyone's towing the line.
Yeah.
Making sure that the president's agenda is being followed.
It definitely raises some red flags about
It does.
maintaining that independence
Big time.
that we were talking about.
Yeah, because how independent can you really be if you've got someone from the White House sitting right there, looking over your shoulder.
Breathing down your neck.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as if that wasn't enough,
Okay.
the order also centralizes legal interpretation. All agencies now have to follow legal interpretations dictated by the president or the attorney general.
So even if an agency's own legal experts disagree
Right.
with how the White House is interpreting a law or regulation, they're basically silenced.
Yeah, their hands are tied, basically.
Wow.
It creates the situation where the president's interpretation trumps any dissenting opinions within the agencies themselves.
Okay, so that seems like a pretty
For sure.
significant change.
Yeah, and this could have major implications for how laws are enforced and how regulations are implemented.
So this order is really like shaking things up.
Absolutely.
How immediate are these changes? Are we talking about something that will gradually take effect, or are people feeling this already?
Oh, no, the impact is immediate.
Okay.
This is happening right now.
Wow.
Ongoing rulemaking processes at many agencies have been completely halted
Oh,
as they try to figure out, how to comply with these new OIRA review requirements.
right.
Agencies are scrambling to hire these White House liaisons. There's a lot of confusion. There's uncertainty.
Yeah.
Nobody knows what to do.
Right.
It's like someone just flipped a switch and suddenly all these agencies are operating under a completely different set of rules.
That's a great analogy. It really kind of,
It's chaotic.
yeah, it paints this picture of chaos.
Yeah.
So we've gone over like the major provisions of this order and how it reshapes this relationship
Right.
between White House and these independent agencies. But what does this mean for like the average person listening to this?
Yeah.
How might this impact their life?
Yeah, that's the key question, isn't it? And to answer that, we need to look at how this shift in power could impact specific areas, like financial markets, the economy as a whole, and even our democratic processes.
Right.
It's really a complex web of potential consequences.
Yeah. And
We're just starting to unravel it.
we're just getting started. So
Yeah.
let's dive into those consequences.
Okay.
First up, financial markets.
Sure.
How are investors and Wall Street reacting to this news?
Well, it's interesting. There's a real mix of reactions. Initially, some investors actually cheered the order,
Okay.
especially those who, tend to favor less regulation. We saw bank stocks rally
Oh, interesting.
on the expectation that, they might face lighter oversight, potentially even some rollbacks of certain rules.
So in the short term,
Yeah.
some people are seeing this as a win
For big business.
for big business.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
But not everyone's celebrating. Some experts are raising concerns about the long-term risks
Okay.
of politicizing regulatory policy. They worry that if these regulations become too dependent on who's in the White House,
Right.
it could create a lot of uncertainty, a lot of instability in the markets,
So we could see this boom and bust cycle,
potentially. Yeah.
depending on which party.
Depending on, which administration is in power.
Yeah, that doesn't sound very stable.
No, not at all. And, think back to the 2008 financial crisis.
Right.
Part of what led to that was a period of deregulation, where oversight of the financial industry was really weakened.
Right.
And so some experts fear, are we heading down a similar path
Yeah.
if this executive order leads to, kind of excessive deregulation
Right.
in pursuit of these short-term economic gains?
Yeah. That's a
Yeah, it's something to think about.
pretty sobering thought.
It is.
It sounds like the potential benefits for some industries might come at the expense of like overall market stability
Potentially, yeah.
and ultimately the average investor.
Right, the average person who's got, their retirement savings tied up in the market,
Exactly.
they could be the ones who end up suffering.
But what about the impact beyond Wall Street.
Okay.
Like on the broader economy.
Yeah, well, there too, we see kind of a mixed bag of potential consequences.
Right.
Some argue that, reducing regulation could lead to increased economic growth and job creation.
Okay.
They see less red tape as a way to free up businesses to innovate and expand.
So a more business-friendly environment.
Yeah, that's the argument.
Okay.
But others worry that, weakening these regulations could lead to a decline in consumer protections, worker safety, environmental standards. The concern is that businesses might prioritize profits over people
right.
and the planet
right.
if they're not held accountable by strong regulations.
So it's that classic trade-off of economic growth versus these protections for workers and the environment.
Exactly. It's a tough one.
Yeah. And it sounds like there are valid arguments on both sides.
There are.
And ultimately, the impact is going to depend on how this is actually implemented.
Exactly how this plays out in the real world.
Right. But before we get too deep into that, there's one more crucial area I want to touch on. The Fed.
The Federal Reserve?
Yeah, this order specifically mentions the Fed.
It does. And this is where things get particularly interesting because the order carves out this exception for the Federal Reserve's monetary policy decisions.
Okay, so that's things like setting interest rates.
Exactly. Things like setting interest rates, controlling the money supply.
Right.
They seem to recognize, the importance of the Fed's independence in managing inflation and keeping the economy stable.
So the Fed gets a bit of a reprieve.
Well, sort of.
Right.
While that core function of managing the money supply seems to be protected, other regulatory functions that the Fed is involved in are still subject to this White House oversight.
Okay.
So, for example, the Fed has a role in regulating banks and financial institutions. And that aspect of their work could definitely be influenced by this executive order.
Interesting. So even the Fed, with its long tradition of...
with its reputation for being independence,
isn't entirely immune...
No one is safe.
...to this power shift.
Right. It seems like nobody is escaping the reach of this thing.
Yeah, it's pretty far-reaching.
It is.
But let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
And talk about something equally important.
Right.
The impact on our democracy.
Our democracy.
And our system of governance.
Yeah, this is where we really get to the heart of the debate about whether this order, strengthens or weakens our democracy.
Okay.
It raises these fundamental questions about, accountability, transparency, and the balance of power in our government.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit.
Yeah.
We've already kind of touched on the argument that, this order could enhance democratic accountability by making agencies more answerable to the president.
To the president, who, after all, is elected by the people.
Yeah, who is elected by the people.
That's the argument.
But what's the counter-argument to that?
Well, critics argue that this line of thinking is dangerously simplistic.
Okay.
They say it ignores the very purpose of having these independent agencies in the first place. These agencies were designed to be insulated from that political pressure so that decisions could be made based on, expert judgment data and the long-term public interest, not just short-term political gain.
So it's about protecting, the integrity.
Yeah, the integrity of the process.
Of expert decision-making.
Exactly.
And preventing them from being used as political tools.
Right. They're not supposed to be pawns in a political game.
Right.
They're supposed to be making decisions based on what's best for the country.
Okay, so true democratic accountability comes not just from having them answer to the president, but from having...
It's about checks and balances.
Checks and balances.
It's about having multiple layers of accountability.
Right, and that includes...
congressional oversight, judicial review, and even, internal safeguards.
Within the agencies.
Within the agencies themselves.
So the concern is that this executive order is really disrupting...
It is.
...that balance.
It's tilting the scales... in favor of the president.
And concentrating too much power in the hands...
So much power.
...of the president.
In one person.
Are there any, specific examples... ...of agencies where this could be particularly problematic?
Absolutely. Perhaps the most concerning example is the Federal Election Commission, the FEC.
Yeah.
This is the agency that's responsible for overseeing our elections, for enforcing campaign finance laws, and for ensuring a level playing field for all candidates and parties.
Yeah, if there's one agency that should be free from political interference, it's the one that's...
You would think so.
...overseeing our elections.
Exactly. Because that's the foundation.
So how could this impact...
of our democracy.
...the FEC's work?
Well, Under this new order, the White House would have the ability to review and potentially block regulations proposed by the FEC.
Okay.
So imagine, for example, if the FEC wanted to tighten the rules on campaign contributions or increase transparency around political spending, the White House could step in and say, nope, not going to happen.
Wow. That's a pretty...
Yeah, it's a scary thought.
Chilling thought.
It is.
Yeah.
And, this is why some critics are calling this order an attack on the very core of our democratic system.
Right.
They argue that, it undermines this whole concept of a government with checks and balances.
Right.
Where power is distributed among different branches and where expert judgment is valued over partisan politics.
Well, this has definitely been a whirlwind tour.
It has.
Of the potential impacts of this order.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
We've seen how it could affect financial markets, the economy.
The very foundations of our democracy.
Even the very foundations of our democracy. But this is a story that is still unfolding.
Oh, absolutely.
There are legal challenges brewing. Congress is figuring out how to respond, and public opinion is just starting to take shape.
Yeah, it's going to be a wild ride.
Yeah. So we're going to delve into all of that when we continue our deep dive in the next part. So we just left off talking about how this executive order could affect elections, which is,
kind of big deal.
Kind of a foundational thing for our democracy.
Yeah, but to really understand what's going on here, I think it helps to look at the historical and legal context.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. To really grasp the significance of this executive order, we need to understand how it fits into the broader evolution of executive power in this country.
Okay.
And the legal precedents that have really shaped this whole relationship between the White House and these independent agencies.
So let's rewind the tape a bit. Are there any past legal decisions that could help us understand how this might play out?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We've already touched on Humphrey's Executor.
Right.
That pivotal Supreme Court case from 1935.
Mm-hmm.
It was a landmark decision during a very, tumultuous time, the Great Depression.
Yeah.
When there was this real sense that the government needed to step up and address these complex economic challenges.
Right.
And Humphrey's Executor really firmly established this idea that Congress could create agencies with a certain degree of independence from the president.
The idea was to ensure that expert judgment and long-term thinking wouldn't be sacrificed to political expediency.
So Humphrey's Executor was basically saying, hey, Mr. President, you don't get to call all the shots.
That's a good way to put it.
When it comes to these independent agencies.
Yeah, the case really recognized that some decisions are just best left to experts.
Yeah.
Who are insulated from,
the political winds
blowing in Washington. Yeah, it was a victory for the idea that, good governance requires a balance of power and a respect for expertise.
So fast forward to today. How does this new executive order square with that precedent set by Humphrey's Executor?
Right. Is it a direct conflict?
Yeah.
Well, it's tricky. The order doesn't explicitly violate Humphrey's Executor by, say, directly firing commissioners without cause.
Right.
But it really gets close.
Yeah.
By asserting this much control over agencies' rulemaking, budgeting, legal interpretations, it's effectively undermining their autonomy.
So it's like they're keeping the players on the field.
Right.
But just rewriting all the rules of the game without their consent.
Exactly. And this is almost certainly going to end up being fought out in court.
Okay.
Supporters of the order, they're going to argue that the president is simply exercising his constitutional authority to oversee the executive branch. But critics are going to counter that this order oversteps those boundaries and encroaches on the powers of Congress to create and structure these independent agencies.
So we're likely looking at a major legal battle.
Oh, yeah. This could go all the way to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, it could go all the way to the Supreme Court.
Absolutely. And the stakes are high.
Yeah.
If this order is upheld, it could set a precedent that weakens agency independence across the board.
Right.
Giving future presidents, regardless of a roadmap for consolidating even more power.
Right.
But if the courts, strike it down or limit its scope, it could reaffirm the importance of checks and balances and, the need for a government where expertise isn't completely subservient to politics.
So it sounds like we're at a real crossroads.
Yeah, a turning point.
In terms of how we think about executive power in this country.
Absolutely.
But this executive order didn't just appear out of thin air.
Right.
It seems to be part of a larger...
It's part of a bigger picture.
Trend or philosophy.
Definitely.
You mentioned this unitary executive theory earlier.
Yes, that's a key piece of this puzzle. The unitary executive theory has been gaining traction in conservative legal circles for decades now.
Okay.
And it's based on this very particular interpretation of Article 2 of the Constitution, which grants the executive power to the president.
Right.
Proponents of this theory, they argue that the president should have absolute control over all aspects of the executive branch.
Including
those independent agencies we've been talking about.
So for them, the idea of these independent agencies having any degree of autonomy is basically like an affront.
Yeah, they see it as a violation.
To the Constitution.
Of the Constitution, yeah. They view any limitations on the president's power as an infringement on his constitutional authority.
Okay, and there are groups.
Right, and groups like the Federalist Society.
Yeah.
Very influential network of conservative lawyers and judges. They've been pushing this idea for years.
So it sounds like this executive order is, in many ways, the culmination.
Yeah, it's the culmination of those efforts.
Of these efforts to really expand.
To expand executive power.
Executive power.
Exactly.
Okay, and it's not just theoretical.
Right.
There are real-world implications here.
Oh, yeah.
Think about the Heritage Foundation.
The Heritage Foundation, exactly.
They've been working on this project called Project 2025.
Project 2025, yeah. Which lays out a detailed plan for how a future conservative president could reshape the federal government.
And a key part of that plan...
involves
taking more control of these independent agencies.
It's central to their strategy. They view many of these agencies as being part of what they call the deep state.
Okay.
These unelected bureaucrats who are, in their view, hostile to conservative values and who obstruct the president's agenda.
So they see this executive order as a way to drain the swamp, so to speak.
Precisely. They want to dismantle or at least severely curtail what they call the administrative state.
Okay.
This involves, rolling back regulations, shrinking the size and scope of these agencies, and making them more directly accountable to the president.
So it sounds like they're aiming for a pretty fundamental shift.
Oh, yeah. They want
in how our government works.
Fundamentally change how our government works.
Okay, but what does that mean for the average person?
Right.
Like, what are the tangible, real-world consequences?
Well, that's where things get a little less abstract.
Right.
And a lot more personal.
Yeah.
This executive order could have this ripple effect across a wide range of issues that directly impact our lives.
Okay.
From the safety of our food and medicines, right, to the stability of our financial system, to the air we breathe, the water we drink.
Yeah.
The decisions made by these agencies, they touch virtually every aspect
That's a lot.
Of our daily existence.
So this isn't just some esoteric legal debate happening in Washington.
No, this is real.
It has the potential to impact our wallets, our health, even the future of our planet.
You hit the nail on the head.
Okay, so let's get specific. What are some of the areas where we might see the most immediate and significant impacts?
All right. Well, one area to watch closely is financial regulation.
Okay.
As we discussed earlier, banks and other financial institutions are likely anticipating a much more favorable regulatory environment under this executive order.
Okay.
That could mean fewer enforcement actions, lighter penalties for wrongdoing, and potentially even rollbacks of certain rules that they view as burdensome.
So potentially good news for Wall Street. But what about the rest of us?
Right. What about consumers and small businesses?
Yeah. Could they end up being more vulnerable if this regulatory oversight is weakened?
That's the big question. Take the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB, for example.
Right.
This agency was created after the 2008 financial crisis to protect consumers from predatory lending practices, unfair credit card fees, and other abusive financial products. If the CFPB's authority is diminished under this executive order, it could leave consumers much more exposed to those kinds of risks.
That's definitely something to keep in mind. Are there other sectors where we might see big changes?
Another area where this order could have a major impact is energy and environmental policy.
Okay.
With increased White House control over agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, we could see a shift towards policies that favor fossil fuel production over renewable energy development.
So potentially faster approvals for oil pipelines.
Potentially.
More drilling on public lands.
Possibly.
And less emphasis on addressing climate change.
Those are all possibilities.
Right.
The concern is that this executive order could be used to really sideline scientific expertise and prioritize short-term economic interests over long-term environmental sustainability.
It sounds like this order could have far-reaching implications.
It could?
For a wide range of issues, and the stakes are incredibly high.
You're absolutely right. And it's important to remember we're just scratching the surface here.
Yeah, well, good thing we have more deep diving to do.
That's right.
We'll be back after a quick break to explore these potential legal challenges to this executive order, how Congress might respond, and what all of this means for the future of our government and our democracy. All right, so we're back, and this executive order is really causing quite a stir.
Yeah, it's definitely raising some eyebrows.
We've talked about the potential impact on everything from Wall Street to climate policy, but the big question now is, will it even hold up legally?
That's the million-dollar question right now. You know, this executive order has really stirred up a hornet's nest of legal and political challenges.
Yeah.
It's like everyone's scrambling to figure out what this means and what they can do about it.
So who are the key players in this legal battle, and what are their main arguments?
Well, on one side, you have the supporters of the order, mainly those who, align with the president's agenda and believe in a stronger executive branch.
Right.
They're arguing that this is all well within the president's constitutional authority to oversee the executive branch, and they see it as a necessary step to rein in what they view as an overly bureaucratic and unaccountable administrative state.
So they're framing this as like a course correction.
Exactly.
Bringing these agencies back in line.
Back in line, under control.
Under control.
They argue that these agencies have become too powerful, too disconnected from the will of the people as expressed through the president.
But then you have the critics.
Right, and they're coming from all sorts of different perspectives, legal scholars, former government officials, public interest groups, even some conservatives who are traditionally wary of executive overreach.
And what are their concerns?
Well, their concerns are multi-layered. Some argue that this order violates the separation of powers.
Okay.
By giving the president too much control over agencies that are supposed to be somewhat independent.
Right.
Others say it conflicts with existing laws that specifically grant those agencies certain authorities and autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
And still others say it goes against the spirit of the Take Care Clause of the Constitution, which requires the president to faithfully execute the laws, not just impose his own will.
So basically, hey, Mr. President, you can't just rewrite the rules of the game because you don't like how it's being played.
That's the gist of it, yeah. They argue that this order undermines those checks and balances that are essential to a functioning democracy.
And they're not just talking about it, they're taking action.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
We're already seeing a wave of lawsuits being filed.
Wow.
With groups like Public Citizen State Attorneys General, even some individuals who've been directly impacted by this order leading the charge.
It sounds like this is going to be a long and messy legal battle.
Oh, it almost certainly will be. And the outcome could have really far-reaching consequences.
Yeah.
If the courts uphold this executive order, it could embolden future presidents to exert even greater control over the federal bureaucracy.
Right.
Potentially leading to a significant shift in the balance of power towards the executive branch.
But if the courts strike it down...
Right. Then it would send a very strong signal that there are limits to presidential power.
Mm-hmm.
And that the independence of these agencies is worth protecting.
So a lot hinges on how the judiciary interprets this order?
Absolutely.
But what about the other branches of government? Is Congress just going to sit on the sidelines and watch this play out?
Well, not necessarily. While the Republican-controlled House of Representatives is unlikely to directly challenge the president on this,
Okay.
Democrats in both the House and the Senate are exploring ways to push back.
Okay.
They're talking about introducing legislation to strengthen agency independence, using their power of the purse to restrict funding for certain activities mandated by the order. Right.
And holding hearings to investigate the impact of this executive order and potentially shine a light on any abuses or overreach.
So even with a divided Congress, there are still levers they can pull.
Oh, yeah.
To make things difficult for the administration.
Absolutely. And don't underestimate the power of public pressure.
Right.
The more attention this order gets, the more scrutiny it faces.
Mm-hmm.
The more likely it is that the administration will have to respond to concerns and potentially even modify its approach.
So it's not just a legal battle, it's also a political battle being waged in the court of public opinion.
Exactly. And how those two battles intersect and influence each other will be fascinating to watch.
It's a story that's still being written.
Absolutely. The ending is far from certain.
So we've covered the potential legal challenges and how Congress might respond.
Right.
But let's zoom out for a minute.
Okay.
And think about the bigger picture. If this order stands, what could it mean for the future of our government and our democracy?
Well, that's where things get really interesting and a little unsettling.
You know, If this executive order becomes the new normal, it could have really profound implications for how our government functions.
Right.
And for the balance of power between the different branches. We could see, future presidents, regardless of party, emboldened to assert even greater control over the federal bureaucracy.
Wow.
Potentially leading to an era of unchecked executive power.
So this isn't just about President Trump.
No, it's much bigger than that.
It's about setting a precedent.
It's about setting a precedent that could reshape the presidency for generations to come.
And it's not just about these abstract notions of power.
Right.
It's about how our government actually works or doesn't work.
Exactly.
To address the challenges we face.
If agencies become less about expertise and more about carrying out the political whims of whoever happens to be in the White House, it could erode public trust in those institutions and make it much harder to implement effective and lasting solutions to complex problems.
Right.
Think about climate change, for example. If the EPA's ability to regulate greenhouse gas emissions is weakened, it could have a devastating impact on our efforts to address this global crisis.
It sounds like the stakes couldn't be higher.
They're incredibly high.
This one executive order could have ripple effects across our entire system of government and impact virtually every aspect of our lives.
You're absolutely right. And that's why it's so important to pay attention to this issue.
Yeah.
To understand the arguments being made on both sides and to engage in, thoughtful discussion about what kind of government we want and how much power we're willing to entrust to any one person or branch.
Well, I think it's safe to say that this deep dive has given us a lot to think about.
It has. We've explored a lot of complex issues.
We've explored the intricacies of this executive order, its potential impacts, and the legal and political battles it has sparked.
And it's a conversation that's just beginning.
Absolutely. But knowledge is power, and by understanding the nuances of this situation, you're better equipped to form your own opinions and engage in these informed discussions about the future of our democracy.
This is an issue that affects all of us, and it deserves our attention.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We encourage you to continue exploring this issue and to make your voices heard. The future of our democracy may depend on it.